add questions through Mentimeter later. So don't worry too much about the questions as we go. Okay, so I'll get started with that. So first thing, in terms of background, the background for the information that I'm going to share with you comes from about 4 years ago. I worked as the head of learning for an online language school. It was a completely online language school. I worked there for 2 years, involved in sort of developing the learning products, developing the teachers and managing teacher training. And at that time, we were using just the same kind of environment that we're using now. We had something a bit like Zoom, we had remote classes, and we had around a couple of thousand students who were all based in Brazil and 70 teachers who were based all around the world. And so my job as head of learning was to sort of develop those 70 teachers who were spread all over the place, and sort of help them to make that adjustment from being a classroom teacher to being an online teacher. The school that I worked in was very customer driven. We were a startup company, and that's a great thing to give things focus, because our students subscribed to the school. If they didn't like the school, they could drop their subscription any day. So we had to be very customer focused and make sure we gave our customers what we wanted. One of the key things that came out of that was the importance of the teacher. We had a platform, we had interactive lessons that students could study online. There was an app, but the key thing, the most important thing, all of our students told us was the teacher. It was very important that they got the right teacher. So we introduced a system of allowing students to choose their teacher. And so each lesson, if they didn't like the teacher, for the next lesson, they could choose a different teacher. And this became very interesting because we were tracking lots of data from these 2,000 lessons each month and tracking the patterns of choice and use that they took with the teachers. And we started trying to map that against identifying why some teachers were so much more popular than others, and what made students choose that teacher. Our first instinct, as probably most schools think, is to sort of evaluate the native, non-native speaker aspect. And we found that native speakers were not the most popular teachers. I'm sure lots of people are reassured to find that, but it wasn't anything to do with native speakerism. And I'll go on to sort of share what it was to do. And because it was much more to do with engagement and interpersonal skills. We came up with 6 key areas. I created an infographic about those 6 key areas that we discovered that we needed to train our teachers in. I've got a link to the infographic here, so I'll share that with you as well. I'll just put that link through chat because it does have some interactive buttons on that link to some text. Okay, just close that again. Okay, so in the key areas that we discovered that were important, of course, the first one was environment, the environment in which the teacher was working in and the student was working in. And by environment, I mean the actual room, the space that they were working in. There were some key elements to that had to be appropriate for teaching in. And probably you've all kind of struggled with this a little bit over the last few months when you've shifted from a classroom to trying to find somewhere in your house to teach. We discovered that this environment was very important, and I'll go into that in more detail. Another thing was the technical aspects. There are a number of technical aspects that were very important to students and to teachers to make them successful. Although these were less important, these turned out to be things that were quite quickly acquired. How to use microphones, how to use the various settings on the platform, and those kinds of things. They came out pretty quickly that our teachers were able to acquire those. The most important one we discovered was number 3, and that was the interpersonal. And that was the real key to getting teachers to engage with students, was how they related to students through the camera. You know, how they made eye contact, you know, how they used their body language and their voice and things like that. And that was what became really key, and what students found really engaging about teachers was how they projected their interpersonal skills through the camera. There are, of course, a number of pedagogical elements that, you know, were very important as well. I'll go into those less within this session, but we'll touch on some of those. And you can click through these on the infographic if you want. You know, another one was actually student behaviour and teacher behaviour, and sort of making sure that students knew how they should behave within a virtual classroom, and teachers knew how they should behave. You know, there are lots of sort of things connected with behaviour that helped us build trust with students, and that was very important, and I'll go into these in a bit more detail later on. And the final thing was kind of understanding motivation. You know, working in this kind of environment does impact on motivation, both for teachers and for students. And there's a lot that you can do about that to help to drive motivation. But one of the first things you need to do is actually understand, you know, where teachers and students are coming from. You know, and I'll have a quick look at some processes for that. So those were, you know, those were some of the things linked to teacher training. And we found that developing teachers, especially particularly the interpersonal level, really helped them maintain, you know, and keep our students on board. Before we did this research, we found that within the first 3 months of students subscribing to our school, we were losing something like 30% of our new students within the first 3 months. And we weren't really sure what was going wrong there. And when we adjusted these things, and when we adjusted the second thing that I'm going to show you, which is learner training, we found that we reduced that 30% dropout within the first 3 months to 0. We actually didn't lose any students within our first 3 months afterwards. And this is one of the other key important aspects, and that's learner training. How do you support and prepare your students before they come into this kind of environment? And that's something I'm going to ask you, actually. There's a little QR code here. I'll just flag up this questionnaire. If you've got a mobile phone handy and you can scan the QR code, please scan it onto your phone. Or if you're in the web browser, open a new tab and go to menti.com, and then there's the code there to enter. I'll also share a link with that to you. Oh no, I haven't prepared the link, so I can't share that link with you. Okay, so if you could go to that and just share, you know, how have you prepared your students for studying online? You know, often we assume that our students, because they're teenagers, this is all easy for them, technology is easy for them, but we found out that that wasn't the case. So how do you go about preparing your students to study online? We've got a couple of things already, and there's a few more coming through. Yeah, things like watching videos in advance, setting up maybe a manual or something like that. Great, somebody's doing a full week of onboarding. That can really help. Platform familiarization, managing students' expectations. Yeah, some great things there. Syllabus and a short tutorial. Yeah. What we found was, you know, doing these kinds, you can scroll through these later when I give you a link through the to the presentation. What we found was, you know, doing these kind of onboarding things before they got into that first lesson was vitally important for retaining our students. And these are the kind of 5 areas that we trained them with. You know, first one was actually environmental, and actually helping them understand how they should set up their room, how they should set up their computer, the kind of things that were important about them, so that they could do concentrated study. You know, okay, that's difficult for some students. They're also working in the same difficult environment that they have. The next thing was, of course, the technical. And again, that's probably the thing that a lot of those video tutorials that you're talking about deal with, you know, showing them how to mute and unmute themselves, turn their camera on and off, deal with different aspects of the platform. You know, those were very important too. You know, so we had a string of those videos and we drip feeded them to students in their first couple of weeks before they had their first lesson. So sending out just short 2-minute tutorials, you know, one every 2 or 3 days. So we gradually built their expectations before they launched into that first lesson. There was also sort of the pedagogical aspects. Or where's my pop-up gone? It's this one. You know, teaching them how to do things like take notes and review notes and create a digital portfolio so that they were storing their work. You know, these kind of pedagogical aspects, you know, we helped to prepare them with ahead of time. And those kinds of things really helped as well. Is that going to open? You know, the other thing that we helped prepare them with was the kind of behavioral things and setting up, you know, expectations about their behavior. You know, things like dressing appropriately for a lesson. You know, it might seem insignificant, but if you want your students to have their webcam on, they need to be dressed appropriately and, you know, ready to do that lesson. You know, Brazil was kind of a very laid back culture to be working in, and we had some students logging into their lesson sitting in bed with their laptop in a vest. You know, and they had to kind of understand that that wasn't really appropriate. You know, you're coming to a classroom, you know, you should dress appropriately. But also, you know, having a code of, so we created a code of conduct to make sure everybody knew what was expected of them. They signed up to that before they started their first lesson, and that everybody knew what was appropriate behavior. You know, that code of conduct is, I'll come back to this later, but that's quite important if we want to encourage our students to get the webcam on, that they know and they feel safe within this environment, and that they know they're protected and how they're protected. And of course, we sort of help them deal with sort of motivational aspects. Well, that's not working too well either. My presentation buttons have let me down. Okay, and sort of gave them some tips on motivation. And of course, all of this was a gradual process that we built through, you know, email nurturing, sending out spaced messages, and building them into that first lesson, so that when they came to the first lesson, they were already prepared. They knew how to use the platform. You know, they knew what was expected of them, and that maybe we also had a kind of onboarding session with a customer service person who gave them a chance to sort of try out the platform and attempt to use it. So when everybody came to that first lesson, they were ready, and that first lesson was successful. And the importance of making that first lesson successful cannot be understated. You know, if you really want to sort of start and give your students a positive impression, that first lesson and the success of that first lesson is vital. You know, and that's what really kept people coming back. We really focused on building a great first lesson experience. You know, and, you know, of course, the benefits of that onboarding process, you know, okay, the teacher was far less stressed. They had far less troubleshooting problems to deal with. They weren't in their first lesson trying to get students to put on their headphones, trying to show them how to connect and all those kinds of things. Lots of things like that. It improved the classroom dynamics because everybody felt happier. They weren't stressed dealing with those kinds of problems. Greatly reduced our dropout by, as I said, you know, we lost that 30% dropout over those first 3 months. And of course, it led to much more successful learning and happier students. So I can't, you know, understate how important it is to get that onboarding process right. If you want to follow up on that, there's an article here that I wrote, which you can check out later on. It's an article about ensuring the success of your first lesson. So if you want to go through and follow that up and get some of those recommendations, by all means do. So I want to go through some of that in a bit more detail now, you know, not too much, but hopefully, you know, some of these things are quite important. You know, of course, the first thing, you know, we teach our students and our teachers about is the room and making sure you have an appropriate room. You know, you need somewhere quiet. You don't want lots of background noise, somewhere private where you're not going to be disturbed, with fresh air, you know, somewhere that's not too hot, no distractions, and of course no background noise. If students or teachers are getting loads of background noise, it filters through to everyone and impacts on everyone's classroom experience. So make sure they're prepared and they have the right kind of room. I think, you know, your background's also very important. I also go for this kind of plain background, and this is the background that I mean. I don't mean the background to your slides. You know, try and keep that distraction as distraction-free as possible. I mean, I prefer a white background because it lights things up a little bit more. I'm struggling with light today as it's a very dark morning here, but you know, think about the clothes as well, the way your clothes contrast with the background. I went to see a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and someone was teaching in a dark room with dark clothes on, and they looked like just a head floating on the screen, and it was kind of a bit of a weird experience. So, you know, think about your background and how you contrast with it. You know, I've got big bookshelves over there that prove my credibility, but they also distract my students, so I go for something that's plain. And I do have sort of some whiteboards that I can stick up there. Think about lighting as well. You know, yeah, there's a comment about the Zoom, the kind of Zoom digital backgrounds. They kind of cover up a lot of things, but they can be a bit freaky around the edges as well. And if you move backwards and forwards, or you move around a lot, as I do, then you tend to sort of mush into your black background a bit, which I don't want to do. You know, next thing is to think out the lighting. The main thing to avoid is the silhouette. You know, if you've got light behind you, you become a silhouette. You're not going to be able to build any kind of use your interpersonal skills and build rapport with your classrooms. Okay, you know, my top left-hand corner picture, that would be great if you had the proper lighting rig, but none of us can afford that. Things to avoid, again, you know, the bottom left-hand corner, try not to have a bright light that's shining on your face, because if you're teaching for a long time, you're going to end up with a bad headache and bad eyesight. I actually like my room just with a few desk lamps. It's struggling a bit this morning, and I kind of try to reflect light off the wall. The best thing, I don't have one of these, but I'm told the best thing is this, which is a ring selfie light. You know, if you can afford one of these, they're actually not very expensive. They actually, because they're circular as well, they look like your pupils are dilated, and so they make you appear to be more attractive too. So if you can get the ring selfie light to light yourself, then that's supposedly the best thing to give an overall kind of good light where you're clearly visible and you look more attractive. So, you know, if you want to become a kind of webinar social influencer, that's the one for you. I haven't got one of those, honest, but I'm thinking of investing in one, because I struggle with lighting a lot in my dark room. But getting lighting right is important, because you need to be seen. The next thing I'll look at is the webcam. And, you know, people ask me, what's the essential tool? What's the most important tool you have if you want to teach online remotely? And the single most important tool is your webcam and the way you use it. You know, you can use it two different ways. You can be this kind of teacher, you know, and how good do you think his rapport is? Probably not that great, you know. Or you can be this kind of teacher. Hopefully looks a bit more like me. He's not smiling very much, but you know, that I can work on that. I don't take very good selfies. I'm not a very good selfie person. But you know, just shifting your camera and the position of your webcam can change the way you appear to your students and have quite a big impact. You know, there's a big difference in terms of interpersonal skills that this guy can bring compared to what this guy can bring. And we'll sort of look at how that's done. You know, one of the key things really is eye contact, being able to make eye contact. And that's, I can't understate how important that is. You know, try and get your webcam at eye level. You know, so mine's just here, it's just above my eye level, so I look up at it slightly. You know, that will help you to make eye contact, because what we tend to do is to look at the screen or to look at ourselves on the screen when we're monitoring ourselves, rather than looking at the webcam. And the webcam is what helps us to make eye contact. It's a bit more difficult if you're wearing glasses. You know, if I take them off, maybe that looks a bit more like me making eye contact there. Okay. One thing that you can do if you're using a laptop riser is You know, laptops give a bit of a problem. You know, if you're using a laptop and you've lent the screen right but light back like it shows in my picture, you know, what you tend to get is the camera's looking up to you, and that distorts your head and your face and gives people a better view of the top of your room than it does of you and your body. So instead of using your laptop like that, if you can get a laptop riser, you know, what you can do is this. And I have one around here somewhere, I think. Yeah, I'll just grab it. Sorry, here's my laptop riser that I use when I'm using my laptop, and I just put it on there. This is a very cheap one, you know, and because there it is. And what it does is it rises the body of your laptop up, and that lifts your camera, and it allows you to tilt the screen back further. And ideally, you should have the screen parallel with your body. You know, if the screen is at an angle to your body, then it's going to distort the way you look. But if the screen's parallel to your body, because the field of focus that lenses have, you'll look much more normal, and it'll capture much more of you. So those are very, very useful things to have. The other thing that's really interesting and really helps a lot is here on Zoom, you can monitor yourself. So there's a picture of a presentation I was doing, and there's my monitor screen where I monitor myself. And on Zoom, you can drag that around. And I actually drag mine to the top of the screen so that it's underneath my webcam. You know, and because you watch yourself while you're teaching, you know, you tend to look at yourself. If that's up at the top underneath your webcam, then it appears like you're making eye contact. You're actually just looking at yourself, but it appears like you're making eye contact. And maybe if you've got your webcam on now, you can do this. You see, just have a look at the difference. If I drag my monitor down to the bottom, now I'm watching myself and I'm teaching like this. No, so here I am teaching away, looking at myself. If I just drag that up to the top of the screen, now it appears like I'm making eye contact and I'm looking at you. And that's a very important change in terms of developing your communication skills and your interpersonal skills. That's something that's also really important for our students, because we're going to be using these kind of environments for a long time. We need to build their ability to communicate effectively in this kind of environment. So that's one tip for making better eye contact. Drag that monitor up to the top of your screen. Another important thing to do is play with the distance. I mean, I actually teach standing up, as you can probably tell now, and that enables me to move around quite a lot. So I can play with the distance, If you're in a physical classroom, you probably do this all the time. You change your position according to different stages in your classroom. You change your proximity to your students when you want their attention, or maybe when you're giving them instructions, or when you monitor, or when you want to give them space, and you can do the same thing here. I can move in close and actually wag my finger at you and tell you to listen if I want to, if I've got this kind of distance. I can move backwards. I can, then show you different things and different parts of realia and things like that, which I can sort of use the distance between the camera and myself there. So think about how you use that distance. Think about, giving students space to think. So I'm just going to give you couple of minutes to think about that, and I'm going to step out. So, using that space and that distance, if you're standing up, you can move around much better, and you can do that, and you feel much more dynamic as well. And of course, sitting at a desk all day is the new smoking. Nothing will kill you quicker than sitting at a desk for hours and hours every day. So stand up, and move around a bit, and you'll feel more dynamic too. Of course, the other great thing about standing up and moving around is it enables you to use your body language a lot more. I mean, my room's a bit dark at the moment, but I can use my hands, I can use gestures, I can come in and use facial expressions and things like that. So, think about how you use proximity in space, because these are really important things in terms of building students' communication skills and building your ability to connect and build interpersonal relationships with them and between them and each other. Okay. I mean, the next thing to think about is how you use your voice and sound. I think it's very important that you stress to students that they all use a headset. I actually use a Bluetooth one, so I don't have the cables. And I'll show you, this is one half of my Bluetooth one. I use a little thing called Jabra, and I can put these in my ears. And because they're not connected, it also means that I can move around quite easily without worrying about pulling the lead out or the cable out. I was moving around a lot with my iPhone headphones plugged in and managed to yank my computer off its stand, which isn't recommended. So, you know, if you've got Bluetooth ones, that's great, that can really help. But these also have a microphone in them. So use a headset for your microphone and your speakers. If you're using built-in speakers or a built-in microphone, that's going to start picking up noise off your CPU and the fan on your computer. And that noise is going to go to your students as well. And that, you know, makes the whole learning experience and the whole sound experience more difficult. It's also worth thinking about how you use your voice. You know, voice is a very important tool, you know, particularly for us as language teachers. If you're used to being in a big classroom with lots of students and projecting to the back of the room, you'll need to think about taking the level of your voice down. You don't need to do that here. The technology does it for you. You can even mute your students, which is a great thing that probably most of us would love to be able to do in the physical classroom. You know, being able to mute your students and make them listen to you means that you don't have to project. If you're using your conference speaker voice, you know, in this kind of classroom, it can become very difficult to listen to. And that's been my experience at some web conferences that I've attended. You know, people have been saying, well, everyone, welcome to the conference. How are you today? You know, and an hour of that becomes, you know, a little bit torturous. You know, think about how you use your voice. You can drop the level of your voice down. Think about how you change your voice when you're giving instructions. Think about how you use your voice, you know, when you're giving students feedback. So lots of different ways to think, to sort of think about. And those are all things that we do naturally in the physical classroom. I'm going to share a few kind of tips and games for building engagement through the webcam, because often students are very reluctant to turn on their webcam, especially once they get into the teenage period. And that's something that's very important. You know, we must encourage them to use the webcam and to sort of build their communication skills through it. You know, one of the first things that will help them do that is what I've mentioned before, is make sure you have a code of conduct. You know, make sure they know what is and isn't acceptable behavior, so that things like dressing appropriately, you know, make sure students know that how to dress for this, that they should dress appropriately for the lesson, you know, that what things they shouldn't do in the classroom, things like, you know, not taking screenshots of someone or not making videos of people during the lesson. You know, make sure they know that those things they can't do. You know, make sure they know what's appropriate behavior in terms of, you know, contacting other students and sending them private messages. So, you know, ensure that you have this kind of code of conduct. I'll give you a link to an example one that I just sort of quickly put together. You know, and you can adapt this if you want to something appropriate, you know, so that they have some ideas of the kind of do's and don'ts of the classroom, you know, and they know things that they shouldn't do. You know, so you have that code of conduct, they know what they should and shouldn't do, but they also know who do they report it to. If somebody's making them feel uncomfortable or is doing something that breaks the code of conduct, who do they report it to? There should be a reporting process, you know, whether they go to the teacher or someone at the school, you know, because it could be the teacher that's making them feel uncomfortable, you know, so make sure there's a reporting process, there's a code of conduct, and, you know, everybody knows what the consequences are too. You know, students should know that, you know, if they break the code of conduct, there will be consequences and what those consequences are. So, you know, get all those things in place so that students trust you and trust that they feel secure to open the webcam and be part of the class. In terms of sort of things that can help you sort of build engagement and teach students how to use the webcam. You know, show and tell is a great one. You know, we've all done show and tell in the classroom, I'm sure, but you know, actually doing it in this classroom gets them to use the webcam. So, you know, I've got this little thing that, you know, I show my students. Here it is. It's a little snail. It sits on my desk all the time. It's made of glass. And it's very important to me, has significance to me, because it was my very first Father's Day present from my oldest daughter. It was the first time she actually surprised me with a Father's Day present. And that was when she was about 6, I think. And so that's sort of very important to me, and that sits on my desk all the time. And so getting them to do show and tell gets them using this camera and using this space, and it shows them, you know, how much distance they need between the space and the camera as well. So model the activity, then get students to try it themselves. Another nice activity which links in very much to, you know, to communication skills is mirroring. You know, when we feel empathy towards someone or we like someone, we tend to mirror their body language while we're speaking to them. You can use this as an activity for students, and you can sort of model it. So you model the body language and then you get them to copy. So as you're talking to them, gradually change your body language and ask your students to change theirs and to copy you and mirror you. And that kind of mirroring, that helps build a relationship with the person you're speaking to and build trust with this person you're speaking to. And again, that's an important communication skill and one that we can transfer to here. So sort of get them to practice that kind of mirroring, and that you can actually put them in groups in breakout rooms to do that, get one student to lead and the others to try and copy, and they can take it in turns to copy someone. You know, another one is getting them to think about the link between, you know, their posture and how they look on screen and the kind of attitude they're conveying. You know, we're all sitting there in front of the camera, and it's very easy to become very unconscious of how we're appearing to the other people watching us. And it's something that students do need to be aware of. What kind of message are you putting out there while you're on camera? You know, are you kind of this one who's monitoring his phone, or are you this one who's not sure what's going on, you know, this one who's looking really bored? But again, you know, you can get students to mime different attitudes, and you know, use this as a game that you can play in groups with your students. Get one to mime an attitude, the others guess the attitude. One to suggest an attitude, the others to mime the attitude, and kind of guess what they're conveying. And it just helps to build awareness of how we appear to people on the camera, you know, and what we look like. Now, one of the other really important aspects of sort of building rapport and building engagement with students in the remote classroom is team building. You know, actually students have to feel kind of comfortable and with each other, not just with you. So it's not just about the rapport that you build with your students, it's about the rapport that they build with each other. So it's important to try and build them as a team together. Often we do things like group work, but that isn't really the same as building them as a team. So I've got a quick questionnaire for you in my Mentimeter questionnaire. Once more, there's the instructions. I'll put a link this time through the chat as well for those of you who haven't got a QR code reader. Okay, so my task just for a few minutes to think about what's the difference between a group and a team? What's the difference? What makes a team different from a group? I'll step out and give you some time to think about that. Okay. I'll take that off and see we've got what suggestions we've got. Yeah, so that's great. You know, team has specific goals, but not just specific goals, but they're, sorry, specific roles. Yeah, I thought that was goals, I misread. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Team has a specific purpose, and not just, you know, individual purposes, but shared purpose as well for the team. Okay, so yeah, most of that's great. Yeah, that's pretty much. Okay, and I've prepared a few differences here, groups versus teams. And if you're on a small screen, this is going to be a bit more difficult for you to read, but you can click into it later through the presentation. Goal orientation, yes, shared goals. You know, teams have shared goals, whereas groups, each person within the group is pursuing individual goals. You know, when you become part of a team, you commit to that team and commit to the success of that team. Whereas if students are just working in groups, there isn't that same commitment. Of course, team members collaborate together and sort of use their talents together and share those together. You know, teams value contrasting views. You know, a good team is a diverse group of people with different views, and that makes the team stronger. Whereas groups, you know, people in groups are often feel threatened by people with different views. Attitudes to peers, you know, can be quite different. You know, in a team, they see their peers as someone who's helping them, whereas in groups, they might feel that they're competing with them. You know, making a contribution to the group, team members are encouraged to offer their skills. You know, you want to draw the best out of your team. You're not just thinking about what you have to give, but what you can get from other people as well. So everybody contributes. You know, problem solving as well. You know, team members see conflict as part of human nature. You know, and that conflict is a positive thing within a group, and you come up with more possible solutions to a problem by having conflict. You know, whereas groups often feel threatened by those. Decision making as well. You know, teams share in the decision making, and whereas decision making can be difficult for groups. So, you know, teams don't just come about, you know, we have to build them. So, you know, here are some tips and some recommendations and ideas for building teams and team building games. Of course, the first thing is, you know, getting to know you games. Probably most of us play getting to know you games in the first lessons in our physical classrooms, but these are some getting to know you games which you can use within the remote classroom. You know, one great thing is actually sharing photographs of your life. You know, that's something that often we do, you know, for the physical classroom, and it's something that I kind of do with my students here in the virtual classroom. You know, because students are home, they've probably got lots of pictures about, and again, you can use the webcam to share them. So I'm showing you a picture now. There's a little picture. That's something from my life. Have a good look at that. And if you look closely at that, the little boy in the red pullover with the bow tie on, that's actually me. And the little boy with the red pullover and the bow tie on, that's me. And when that photograph was taken, I was about 4 years old. And I remember that to this day. I remember everything about that day, you know, because I actually got to go to the big school where my brother and sister went, and I got to sit in the photo and be part of the photograph. You know, I'm very old, so, you know, back then, you know, when I was 4 years old, having a photograph taken was a really big event. And so, you know, you know, you actually had a photographer there with a big camera and a big sort of studio background, and that was kind of a big event for me, and I really remember that. So, you know, having, you know, sharing photographs of our life together can sort of help us to build that connection. So, you know, get students to show each other pictures of things that are important to them, or people that are important to them in their lives, you know. As they're on there, if they're on laptops and they're in their own home, you know, people feel a bit self-conscious about showing their homes, but you could actually get students to show each other your home, just show the rest of your room. I'd do that with you now, but I'm on a kind of big screen computer, so it's a bit hard to lift up. But, you know, give people a tour of your room, tell them what's in which different places. If they feel confident enough, a tour of the home and walk them around the home. And again, a great way to sort of share something and build a more personal connection. You could have something like a personal facts guessing game if you collect a whole bunch of facts about your students, and then you can kind of get them to guess what they are afterwards. Guess which person each fact is about. Another one that I feel really works well is something that's called The Aliens Have Landed. And what you do for this one is you put students into groups of 4 or 5. You tell them that aliens have landed on Earth and these aliens can't speak any English, okay? So what they have to do is they have to choose 5 pictures from anywhere on the internet that they would show to the aliens to help them understand our culture, and get them to actually choose 5 pictures together that show people from a totally different culture what Earth culture is about. And for me, this is a great activity because it really makes students think about their values and what's important to them and what's best about, our life here together on Earth. And that's a great way to kind of get them sort of building that together. A great team building game that you can try is Desert Island, and this is one that can help your students build as a team, but also decide who has which roles within their team. And they imagine that they have to go to, you put them in groups, they imagine that they have to go to a desert island together. They have to choose things, that they can that they would take with them, and then afterwards they kind of analyze the process and find out which different roles each person chose within the team while they were on the desert island. Which person would sort of search for firewood, which person would be on guard duty, which person would be the person who was the group leader, which person built their dwelling. So some nice kind of, that works very well as a team building activity. There's also a link here to an article with 37 of the best virtual team building games. These come from sort of business, and so not all of them will be appropriate for your students, but have a look at them and sort of try and sort of pick out a few others, a few that are appropriate if you want to. But they can be quite useful if you check through that later. So those are things that can help to build the teams. One thing that we often miss as well, and the final thing is, socialization. One of the primary reasons why students enjoy coming to class and why they enjoy studying at university is that, they socialize with people. And this is something that we often don't leave space for in the remote classroom. We don't leave space for students just to get together and have a chat, or just sort of spend some time together or play a game together. So I think it's really worth adding on, an extra 10 minutes either before or at the end or in the middle of your class, where students can just go into breakout rooms and chat together. You can base this around games. There's a few good games here that work for the remote classroom. This is one called From Brightful Play. I'll just share the link with you quickly. And that has a number of games that are appropriate, and it sets it up and manages them for you in the remote classroom. So there are games sort of where students have a word to draw and the others have to guess, or you can have 2 truths and a lie and spot the lie, or describing words and things like that, a bit like that hot seat game that we play. So this is a great site if you want to try some of those. You don't have to register or log in, and it's all free. So give those a try and check some of those out. I'm sort of running out of time, so I'm sort of pushing on a bit now. The last thing, one thing that you could do, together to sort of think about student motivation is sort of actually start thinking about how to build empathy with students, how they build empathy with each other. It's, it's often easy to think that, we are the cause of students' problems, or remote learning is the cause of students' problems. But actually, there's probably a lot more things going on in their lives than just, our lessons. And it's good to sort of actually think out those things and have a think about them, and actually get students to do this as well, and think about, what's a bad day like for them? What are they afraid of? What keeps them awake at night? And think about sort of creating what's called an empathy map. This is an example of an empathy map on the screen. And this process of empathy mapping is very common within within sort of product development and customer, where people are very customer focused. You know, it's very important to think about your customers and try to understand them and empathize with them. And empathy maps can really sort of help you do that. I'll share you a link with for an article that I wrote on empathy mapping. There it is. There's a quick article on empathy mapping if you want to go into that in more detail. But sort of empathy mapping can really help us understand, you know, the problems that our students are having. It can help us understand ourselves. And it's a good thing to do with students and start them empathy mapping other people and characters from stories or characters that they're studying. You know, having an empathy map can really help you get a bit deeper understanding. So hopefully that can help with rapport as well. Okay, so last slide but one. Oh, I have a free book to give you after this, but I'll just do this first. If you've got any questions, you can feel free to put them in here. I'll also pass a link through to them. So if you want to add questions through Mentimeter, through the Mentimeter Q&A or through there, by all means do, and they'll appear on the screen so that we can all see them and share them together. So that tends to work a bit better than putting them into chat, because in chat they kind of get lost quite quickly. So by all means, sort of putting...
Very nice tip, Nick. Maybe this is what we can use like in our webinars in the future or conferences, Mentee. Excellent presentation.
Okay, so as you can see, the questions are starting to come through. The first ones, do you use one screen or two? I actually only use one screen. I don't know what I'd put on the other one, but I do have quite a big screen, so that's quite useful. Okay, I'll go on to the next question. What about taboo subjects? Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that. What about taboo subjects? I think, you know, students are generally very interested in taboo subjects. There's a book called Parsnips, which I think a group of teachers put together, which sort of focuses specifically on a range of taboo subjects that are usually left out of course books. Now, I'm okay with taboo subjects. It's just a matter of knowing your students well enough to sort of to know whether they can deal with those. They're part of life. What to do when students really don't want to turn their cameras on? This is very common with our students. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can force your students to turn their cameras on, obviously, but I think, you know, you have to lead by example. You know, if you're showing a good example of how to use the camera, if you're using it to actually teach them, you're using activities that involve the camera and sort of helping them to build their communication skills with them, then they will eventually, you know, feel comfortable and want to turn it on. But that code of conduct that I mentioned earlier, the code of conduct is really important. You know, if you don't have the code of conduct there, you know, students can feel very insecure and they don't know what's going to happen when they turn their camera on. So, you know, please do get that set up. Some students prefer not to have their screens on for cultural or other reasons. You know, I don't know that I agree with that. I've worked in all sorts of cultures all around the world, you know, and I think, you know, people say it is for cultural reasons, but actually to some extent there's a bit of bullshit going on there. You know, I can understand, you know, people having personal reasons for not turning them on, but I think, you know, if you're modeling it and you're making everybody feel safe, then, you know, you can get past that. You know, all of us who go into a face-to-face classroom can see each other. This is really not any different. You're just sort of looking at people. I know, you know, there's probably an issue with this for Saudi Arabian women, but, you know, they can use the webcam and still use their veil if they want to. You know, I think it's more of an issue with Saudi women if it's a mixed class. If it's a single sex class, then it won't be so much of a problem. They're fine with seeing with each other, seeing each other. You know, it's a matter of adapting to the culture and thinking about how you can adapt that and still use the webcam. How strongly, again, probably covered this already. You have to lead from the front. You can't insist, but you can be a model for good use. If you're not modeling it, then it's not going to happen. If you don't have your code of conduct, it's not going to happen. And you're going to end up with kind of pretty dull kind of classes that just focus on you. Some students struggle. Internet connectivity can be an issue. That depends a lot on what platform you're using. You can sort of manage that a bit and have them turn it on and off for specific activities and sort of deal with who has it on at which different times. But in a lot of cases nowadays, the connectivity is becoming less of an issue, especially with a platform like Zoom, which degrades the quality of the screen to balance against connectivity. Yeah, well, how can I persuade institutions to invest? I think, they're going to have to realize that they do have to invest and that, they do have to support teachers in enabling them to do this right. I think, over the last few months, I think a lot of institutions have felt that things will kind of return to normal. And I think now we're beginning to realize that actually this is normal. This is going to be normal for a long time. It's going to become part of how we teach, not just because, the virus won't ever go away. It will go away, but some people are going to prefer to do this. They'll find out that it's just as good and they don't have to leave home and fly halfway around the world to do it. So this is something that's going to be becoming a permanent fixture in our lives. So, universities are going to discover that they have to invest in these things. I do stand in all the lessons that I do, although I haven't taught an 8-hour day standing. It's much more comfortable than sitting. You feel much more alert. You can move about a bit. I'm burning some calories here while I teach, but I have a platform on my desk that goes up. It rises my laptop up. And I can sort of get it to go down again afterwards so that I can sit down if I get tired. But again, that was sort of an investment, but sort of working out how you can have some sitting time and some standing time can really help to deal with that. How am I doing for time? I don't want to go over time. I've got a few minutes left.
I think you have a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Students who switch off cameras because they want to mess around and one by one other students follow. Yeah, again, they do switch off cameras and they do mess around, but if they're messing around, it's because they're not engaged, they're not using the camera. If we can engage them in some way, then that really helps. Again, sort of same things I've been going off with. This is quite a complex question, yeah. Our lessons are delivered entirely asynchronously, although we encourage students to work together, great. When should student support be one-to-one and when should it be small groups? I think probably the most key thing for one-to-one is sort of things like feedback. And you can set up a one-to-one session like this and sort of to give students feedback on their work. And I think that's very important. There are lots of free platforms as well where students can work in groups together. And if you're doing things like project work, I'd encourage them to try and do that bit live. But a lot of that depends on, sort of their situation. What is the perfect NB for students per class? Perfect number of students per class. It depends. I think for language classes, optimal to balance out things like connectivity, sound problems, groupings, optimal is about 12, which is quite small, compared to the regular face-to-face classroom, but that's what will work best for this kind of classroom is about 12. You can have groups of 3 groups of 4, 4 groups of 3, pairs, 2 groups of 6, it works very well as a number, and it works very well in terms of, being able to manage those groups and monitor them when they're in breakout rooms and things like that. It starts to get more difficult with bigger classes, and especially with sort of classes that are going over 20 or 30, that becomes very difficult. But, again, looking to the future, that's something institutions are going to have to think out about. You know, we can't continue to have classes of 100 in this kind of environment if you want it to be interactive.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much. If you have more questions, you can go to the Padlet. I can share the link once again with you. Give me a moment. Nick, do you want to share the discount code with?
Yeah, on your screen, you can see there's a link to a free book that I wrote called Tools for Teachers. If you want to get a free copy, I'll put the link through the chat. The link is there. It's on Pay here. And if you go there and you click on Buy Now, add your email address and details, and then add this QR code, which I'm showing there on the screen, and that will reduce the cost of it to 0. Okay, so that will, if you click on Buy Now, enter your details, use this code here, which is R98UIQIGL6. Sorry, it's such a complex code. If you use that, then it will reduce the price to 0, and you'll be able to download it for free. The last thing I should give you also is the link to this presentation. So here's the link to the presentation. Coming through the chat now. Okay, there it is, it's on Genially. So when you open the link, you can click through to all the different resources. You can click through and get the code and the link to the book and all those kinds of things. So, you know, please do that. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope you enjoy your remote teaching. I hope you stand up and do it and enjoy moving about a bit more and getting some blood flowing and getting your students to stand up and get some blood flowing as well, you know. And so there you go. Thanks for listening. Thanks for inviting me, and hope to see you again sometime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. That was very interesting, engaging, and inspiring. I have posted the certificate of attendance multiple times. I will do it once again, just to make sure everyone received their certificate of attendance. Please let me know if you had any issues, and I will post the certificate of attendance again. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Just put the link to my presentation through again as well, in case anybody missed it.
Exactly, but don't worry. We are going to post the recording of this session and link slides in our website and YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much. We have the next presenter coming in a couple of minutes. So I will try to welcome Craig, our secretary, who is going to introduce the next speaker, Phil Longwell, another superstar in the learning technologies world. Bye, Nick. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. Just a reminder to everybody, the conversation continues in Padlet. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions about what you've seen today from Nick, please do go to the Padlet link and add those comments to Padlet. All right, without further ado, we will have the next speaker now, and that is Phil